Now that we've looked at how to use Python to read a file, and we've also looked at how we can get user input from the console, let's move on to how to use functions in Python. So let's firstly define a function. So I use the command def, and let's call this one something along the lines of employee details. So let's go with employee, and let's put in things like ID and name. So let's put in name, comma, ID. So now we've got a function here for the employee name and the employee ID. We then also do something called employee name and reference the name in the function above. So employee name equals name, and then we do employee ID equals the ID. So here we go with employee name equals and the name in the line above, and then we do employee ID is then equal to the ID listed above. Once that is done, we can then return a value for that particular function. So whether it's true or false. So let's return if the ID is true or false. We can then put in here, let's put in true. Now that we have the employee name and employee ID, we can then return a value of true if a condition is met. To then call the function, what we need to do is enter a new line here that basically says to employee, and let's give it a value. We'll use the username test1 and the ID 123. Given that test1 is a string, we need to put that in quotation marks. So let me just add the quotation marks here to make sure the function runs correctly. When I run this, let's have a look at what happens at the results section. Now, nothing really has happened because I haven't printed anything here. So let me just go to the line before return the value of true, and let's print employee name and employee ID. So let's do that by typing in print employee name, comma, employee ID. Now what should happen is when I print this, let's have a look. It has returned the username and password, username and ID, because I have called the function in the line below, employee test1 and 123. What's then happened is it has added these values to the name and ID in the employee section above. And then what's happened is we have then said employee name equals name and employee ID equals ID. What has happened here is once the values have been added because we've called the function, we then have returned these values in the employee name and employee ID because these values have been passed on. When I then print the employee name and employee ID, it's then returning the values test1 and 123 because those are the values that have been assigned in the arguments above. If I then want to change the print employee name and employee ID, instead I type in return employee name, employee ID. Let me remove this return true. Now when I press the play button, run button, you'll see that nothing happens because it has returned into the employee name and employee ID, but we have not done anything further from there. If we were then going to use that, we could then use it in a function or something later on, but we haven't done so. Let's use another example now, and let's use something with port numbers, something that will be useful in our hacking examples. So let's define a function here called check port range, and I will put in port number here. So basically what we want to check is if a port number is within a specific range. So let's use the number 65635 as an example, and 0 if port num is greater than 65635, and we'll use the OR port num is less than 0, which indicates that it is within the range 0 and 65635. What we then want to do is return a value of false because it is outside the range, or else return the value of true because the port number is within a range. So just tidy this up and return true. All it's saying is if the port number is greater than this number or less than 0, return false, else return true, because it's checking the port number is within a specific range. Now let's assign a value to each of these, and let's put a port number of 80, and then let's put another port number that will be quite high. Let's use one with a few zeros. And now when we run this particular program, what's going to happen is it's going to return true and then false because we have created this accordingly. Let's just print the port range and port number to the screen, and I'll do that again here with this particular calling of the function. And let's have a look at what happens now. As we can see, the port number 80 is within the range, so it responds as true. And in the second example, the port number is way out of that range, so it returns false. This will be extremely useful when we are checking for port numbers when we are scanning a victim's machine to check which ports are within a specific range, so we can then use this for our hacking purposes. When we have multiple port numbers, we don't want to do this manually.